So we've heard about macros, we like the sound of macros, but how do we create our own macro? Well, there are two methods. Either you physically write the Visual Basic that is behind the macro to carry out the commands that you wish, and that is achievable, but outside the remit of this particular title. Alternatively, we actually record the steps of the macro and let Microsoft Project write the Visual Basic that's behind the scenes. To record the steps that you wish to carry out, obviously you will need to carry out the steps. So let's take our file MyBedroom 2014 and look at creating a simple macro that will actually change the color and the typeface for the data in the task pane. So in this side here, I'm currently using Calibri 12. Perhaps I don't like Calibri 12 and I want to create a macro that will change all the font and the size of the text on this left-hand side. What are the steps involved? Well, the first step is to go to View, come across to the Macros little drop-down arrow and choose Record Macro. My macro needs a name, something much more sensible than Macro 2. However, you cannot put spaces in macro names, so we need to be clever with our naming convention. I'm going to call this Format Sheet, put a capital S for Sheet so I can see that effectively it's a separate word without the space. I can optionally add a keyboard shortcut at this stage as well. You have to be a little bit careful with keyboard shortcuts in that whatever keyboard shortcut you assign shouldn't really be one that does something else, otherwise you will steal that command from that keyboard shortcut and your macro will take precedence over whatever that command should normally be. We will look at keyboard shortcuts separately, so at the moment we're going to leave it without a keyboard shortcut. You need to decide where to store the macro. Now either in your global file, so it's available to all projects, or in the current project, in which case it's only available to other projects when this file is open. If this file is closed, then they cannot have access to the macros within it. So you need to make the decision about the usefulness of your macro. Do you want it in the global file so it's always there? Or do you want it in this file, knowing that you would need to open this file if you wanted to make use of that macro? Let's store our Format Sheet 1 in the global file. So that's the global.mpt file. We then have an optional description. Now you can remove all of this. What it defaults to is macro 2, because that was the default name there, with macro recorded on and the person who's currently registered with the software. So that's guybaccara@live.com. So I'm going to delete all of that and just put this formats the sheet with Arial 10. We also need to decide whether our row references are relative. Notice it defaults to this, or an absolute ID. If you choose absolute, when you play the macro back, it will always do it to exactly the same task ID. Now that may be or maybe not what you wish to achieve. If you stay relative, then it will always do it to the point you are at in the sheet. Same with the column references. Here it defaults to absolute, so if we do something to the task name column, it will always be the task name column. If we move the dot into relative, if we do something to column 3, it will always do it to column 3, regardless of what column 3 contains at that point. This is why it defaults to relative for row references, so it will stay in the row you are regardless of how many tasks you've got, but it will always retain the absolute field. So if you do anything to the start date, if you do anything to the duration, it recalls that regardless of what position it falls in the particular table you're in. Now those two will take a little bit of playing and experimenting with to get the hang of, but most of the time you will leave row references as relative and column references as absolute. For this particular macro, it actually doesn't matter because we're going to affect the whole sheet anyway. So I'm looking to format the sheet with Arial 10 points. Okay. Now the macro is recording, and we know that because if we go to the macros drop down, the option is to stop recording. So I'll click away. Now the good thing about the macro recording is it records actions, not time. So you can be slow and deliberate about your actions, but when the macro plays them back, it will play them back as fast as it can carry them out, which is highly likely to be faster than you can carry them out. So we're going to be slow and deliberate about recording. Now we want to format the whole sheet. So first thing to do is to select the whole sheet. So we click here. The whole sheet is selected. So then it doesn't matter when we play it back how many tasks there are. There may be 10, there may be 20, there may be 10,000. I then want to format the sheet. So on the task ribbon, I'm changing Calibri to Arial. which will be near the top. Arial, where are you? There. And I'm going down to point size 10. And I think we might change the color to sort of dark gray. So those are the changes I want to take effect. I've made those changes. So I then come back to View, Macro Drop List, and Stop Recording. But just before we stop recording, let's just click into there. And then it'll remember that we clicked into there. So that's Stop Recording. Now, because we've had to record the macro to create the macro, it's made the changes that we wanted to carry out, but only for this view. If we then go to Guys Tracking Gantt, we find that it hasn't formatted that because we weren't in that view when we recorded it, and we would now need to run our macro. Well, we simply go to the macros list, View Macros, Format Sheet, that's my macro, and Run. And we find that it formats the sheet, same typeface, we can check that in Task, Arial 10, sort of darkish grey, and leaves me selected in Task ID 1. As quick as that. You saw the playing back was much faster than you recording. If we then went to Guys Gantt Chart, we see that that's not formatted in this way. So we go to View, Macro, View Macros, Format Sheet, Run, and it formats the sheet in a split second. So if you can think of repetitive tasks that you will want to do over and over again in Microsoft Project, they become ideal candidates for turning into macros. The turning into macro is a slower process. We need to start the recorder, we need to carry out the actions, we need to stop the recorder, and then the macro is saved for future use.